Camera drops out of the clouds and glides over turquoise water so clear it looks photoshopped. Below is Haiti, the island's original Taino name, meaning land of high mountains. Honest branding, the peaks rise like old gods, watching centuries roll in and out like tides. We're hovering over the western third of the island Europeans would later rebrand as Saint-Domingue, then be forced to call Haiti again when the people they enslaved rewrote world history. This patch of the Greater Antilles sits right between Cuba and Jamaica, and if you squint east, you see the border slicing through the mountains toward the Dominican Republic. Today, the 10 departments, Nord, Sud, West, Center, Artibonite, Nordwest, Nord-Est, Sud-Est, Grand Anse, Nips, spread across valleys and plateaus like chapters waiting to be narrated. But we're starting long before departments even existed. Because, surprise, Europeans did not discover this island. They arrived loudly in 1492 and found a full civilization already here. Classic. The camera drifts inland to a ridge once crossed by Cacique Anacaona, the famed Taino leader. Her name appears in early Spanish accounts the way truth appears in colonial archives, inconveniently. From here, you can see everything and nothing at once. The beauty, the blood, the memory. The waves hit the rocks. The breeze shifts. The mountains stand quiet, patient, and a little tired, because they've watched 500 years of resistance unfold right here, and it's time to talk about it. Somewhere near present-day West Department, around the cul-de-sac plain, the year is roughly 1490. The Taino are living their lives blissfully unaware of incoming European chaos. Villages arranged around central plazas serve as community hubs where decisions are made, ceremonies held, and history performed through song. The Canuco agricultural system, raised mounds that prevent erosion and maximize yield, grows cassava, yams, sweet potatoes, maize, beans, cotton, and tobacco. All without fossil fuels, written contracts, or the European compulsion to civilize anyone. Shocking, I know. People fish along the Ganave Channel using techniques passed down through generations. Women tend cotton fields and craft hammocks so comfortable that Europeans will later appropriate both the design and the Taino word hamaca. Chiefs like Bohechio govern Zaragua, the kingdom in the southwest peninsula, from a capital near present-day Leogan. His sister Anacaona, a poet-diplomat whose Araito songs were famous across the island, brokers regional alliances through performance, marriage, and negotiation. Spanish chronicler Bartolomé de las Casas later grudgingly admits in his Historia de las Indias that these were complex, organized societies with governance structures, extensive trade networks, sophisticated agriculture, and rich cultural traditions. A real plot twist for an empire that preferred noble, savage propaganda to justify conquest. Daily life is rhythmic and structured. Cohoba ceremonies use tobacco to facilitate communication with ancestral spirits. Araito performances combine song, dance, and storytelling to transmit history across generations. Carved Zemi icons, fashioned from wood, stone, and shell, represent cosmic forces and ancestral power. Children play near the rivers where the modern Artibonite department will bloom. Adolescents learn farming, fishing, canoe building, weaving. Elders mediate disputes using customary law. People trade across the Caribbean in seagoing canoes that hold dozens of passengers. Taino from Haiti exchange cotton and cassava bread with Lucayans from the Bahamas, with Kalinago from the Lesser Antilles, with other Taino groups from Cuba and Borinquen. These are maritime networks Europe will later pretend never existed, preferring narratives of isolated, primitive tribes. Population estimates vary wildly depending on which historian you consult and which methodology they trust. But Spanish records from the early 1500s suggest hundreds of thousands of people living across Hispaniola, possibly more. They had names for their regions, systems for resolving conflicts, and zero interest in foreign domination. The island wasn't empty. It wasn't waiting. It was simply living. Civilization existed here long before colonizers claimed credit for bringing it. But in December 1492, 3 ships appear on the horizon, and everything changes. Picture late December 1492 near present-day Nord Department, close to what's now Cap Haitian. Christopher Columbus, having sailed past Cuba and along Hispaniola's northern coast, runs the Santa Maria aground on Christmas Eve after the crew falls asleep at the watch. The Taíno cacique Guacanagarix helps rescue the crew and cargo. Columbus immediately writes in his journal that the people are friendly, generous, gentle, and, direct quote, would make excellent servants. And with 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. European first contact diplomacy at its finest. The Spanish build La Navidad from the wrecked ship's timbers, leaving 39 men behind as the island's first European settlement. Columbus sails back to Spain with captured Taíno people to show the monarchs, claiming he's found the route to Asia and gold is everywhere. Spoiler: it collapses within a year because the sailors act like men who should never have been given a colony. They demand gold tributes the Taíno cannot pay, assault women, steal food, and generally behave as if first contact means consequences don't apply. The Taíno, quite reasonably, push back. When Columbus returns in November 1493 with 17 ships and 100-200 men, La Navidad is ashes and the Spanish are dead, but Spain isn't deterred. By 1493, under the Treaty of Tordesillas negotiated with Portugal, Spain officially claims the entire island along with most of the New World. They rename it La Isla Española, Hispaniola. Their stated motives, documented in royal correspondence, appear in revealing order: gold extraction, forced labor, and Christianization. The Requerimiento of 1513, an absurd legal document drafted by Spanish jurist Juan López de Palacios Rubios, is read aloud in Spanish to non-Spanish-speaking indigenous people before attacks, declaring their refusal of Spanish sovereignty and Catholic conversion to be a legal rebellion. Imagine invading someone's home, reading a contract they can't understand in a language they don't speak, and calling it justice. That's the Requerimiento. That's the legal foundation of conquest. Cacique Guacanagarix initially attempts diplomatic coexistence, believing peaceful relations possible. Spanish documents record his efforts to negotiate, provide food, offer guides. They also record Spain's response. The encomienda system, legally distributing indigenous people like property to Spanish colonists as trustees, meant to Christianize them, but actually using them as slaves. The Taíno did not lack civilization, they lacked European paperwork. And when diplomacy failed, Spain turned to systematic, documented, bureaucratized violence. Between 1494 and 1513, Spanish encomiendas spread across what is now Center and Sudeste departments, like a bureaucratic plague carrying swords. Indigenous people are forced into gold mining along mountain rivers, backbreaking work panning in cold water, and plantation labor in the lowlands cultivating European crops. Mortality skyrockets from overwork, malnutrition, introduced diseases like smallpox and measles against which indigenous people have no immunity, and outright violence from encomenderos who view human life as disposable. A 1510 census conducted by Spanish colonial officials records catastrophic population decline. While pre-contact numbers are debated, the collapse is undeniable. Some estimates suggest 80% losses in less than 20 years. Bartolomé de las Casas, writing decades later with eyewitness horror, claims millions died, though modern historians consider his figures inflated. Regardless of exact numbers, entire villages vanish. Yet resistance pulses through the mountains like an underground river. Around 1502, a young Taíno man named Enriquillo is born near the Bajoruco mountain range that today straddles the Haitian-Dominican border. Raised by Franciscan friars and educated in Spanish customs, he witnesses Spanish brutality firsthand when a colonist assaults his wife and steals his horse. Seeking justice through Spanish courts and receiving none, Enriquillo makes a different choice. In 1519, he escapes to the Bajoruco Mountains and begins organizing resistance. For 13 years, from 1519 to 1533, he leads a guerrilla rebellion so effective that Spanish troops under multiple commanders cannot defeat him. Colonial reports describe indios rebeldes living freely in the hills, cultivating hidden farms, launching raids on Spanish settlements, accepting new runaways. Enriquillo uses terrain, weather, and intimate geographic knowledge to humiliate European military tactics. Spain eventually negotiates peace, granting him land and freedom, a rare colonial admission of defeat. Meanwhile, the Kalinago of the Lesser Antilles raid Spanish shipping routes throughout the 1500s, refusing to accept European rule. A 1510 report from Spanish Governor Diego Columbus complains of Carib ferocity, disrupting trade routes and attacking coastal settlements, which is colonial speak for "they fought back effectively and we hated." By 1514, the Taíno population across Hispaniola has collapsed so dramatically that Spanish authorities panic about labor shortages. Bartolomé de las Casas, witnessing the genocide, writes his famous denunciation of the encomienda system in his very brief account of the destruction of the Indies. Unfortunately, his proposed solution, importing enslaved Africans instead, creates its own horrific legacy. The first documented arrival of enslaved Africans in Hispaniola occurs as early as 1502, marking the start of the Atlantic slave trade to the Caribbean and a forced migration that will reshape the island entirely. Indigenous resistance shaped the island's memory long before plantation slavery did. The mountains remember Enriquillo, and when Spain tires of running unprofitable colonies, another empire eyes the unguarded western coast. By the early 1600s, Spain is exhausted and distracted. Gold production has dwindled to almost nothing. The indigenous population has collapsed. Sugar plantations, attempted half-heartedly, never achieved the scale Spain wanted. Maintaining control over the entire island is expensive and, from Madrid's perspective, pointless. Spanish authorities consolidate eastward around Santo Domingo, leaving the western third basically unguarded, the geopolitical equivalent of abandoning your property and then being shocked when squatters move in. Enter the French, the buccaneers, and the plantation entrepreneurs who see opportunity. They want land, sugar, and profit. Basically everything except permission. The stage is set for the next brutal chapter: the construction of history's most profitable slave colony. Around 1625, French and English flibustiers, pirates really, but flibustier sounds more professional on insurance paperwork, set up camp on Tortuga Island, a small rocky outcrop off Haiti's northwest coast. They hunt wild boar descendants from Spanish livestock, smoke meat using indigenous boucan techniques borrowed from vanished Taíno, raid Spanish ships returning from Mexico loaded with silver, and generally act like armed opportunists who found a loophole in imperial surveillance. These weren't philosophers or political theorists. They were violent, pragmatic, and occasionally effective. But they established French presence where Spain had retreated, and that presence attracted attention in Paris. By the 1659 Treaty of the Pyrenees and the 1665 Treaty of Breda, France tightens its grip on Tortuga and adjacent mainland coastal areas. French governors like Bertrand d'Ogeron, appointed in 1665, actively recruit settlers. He brings indentured servants from France, poor men promised land after 3 years of service, and imports increasing numbers of enslaved Africans to clear forests and plant tobacco, then indigo, then sugar. In 1697, the Treaty of Ryswick formally ends decades of European conflict and hands the western third of Hispaniola, now officially called Saint-Domingue, to France. Spain keeps the eastern portion, Santo Domingo. A border is drawn through the mountains that indigenous people had crossed freely for millennia, creating a colonial partition that still divides the island today. The French crown smells money, specifically sugar money, which in the 18th century is essentially petroleum-level wealth. They organized the colony into 3 provinces roughly corresponding to today's Nord, Ouest, and Sud departments, each with a port city, Cap Français in the north, Port-au-Prince in the west, Les Cayes in the south. Plantations spread along the fertile plains, the Plaine du Nord behind Cap Français, the Cul-de-Sac Plain near Port-au-Prince, the Artibonite Valley's rich alluvial soil. A 1681 French census records around 2,000 Europeans and 6,000 enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue. By 1730, those numbers are 12,000 Europeans and 100,000 enslaved Africans. By 1790, just before Revolution, the census shows 30,000 Europeans, 28,000 free people of color, and over 500,000 enslaved people. The demographic shift tells the story. This is a plantation colony built on massive forced migration and systematic violence. What began as piracy becomes industrial exploitation, and the machine is just warming up. It's around 1740 near the Plaine du Nord, and Saint-Domingue has transformed into an economic monster. The colony produces 40% of the world's sugar and 60% of its coffee. It generates more revenue than all 13 North American British colonies combined. French merchants in Bordeaux, Nantes, and Le Havre grow obscenely rich. Enslaved Africans die at rates that would horrify even hardened colonial administrators if they cared about anything besides profit margins. Contemporary observers call Saint-Domingue the Pearl of the Antilles, though no one enslaved here ever used that phrase unironically. To them, it's hell with tropical weather. The Code Noir of 1685, France's legal guidebook for managing enslaved populations, pretends to be humane while permitting torture, mutilation, and forced labor from dawn past midnight. Article 42 allows masters to chain people. Article 43 authorizes killing enslaved people who strike their masters, calling it justifiable homicide. Article 44 declares enslaved people to be movable property, furniture that happens to bleed. The code prohibits working on Sundays and mandates religious instruction, which sounds generous until you realize these are the only rules consistently ignored, while punishment clauses are enthusiastically enforced. Plantation ledgers from estates like Habitation Fleuriot and Habitation Breda meticulously record the economics of death. Life expectancies are so short, often 7 to 10 years after arrival, that French planters prefer buying new Africans from slave ships over wasting resources on improving conditions. A man bought for 2,000 livres who survives 3 harvest seasons generates profit. so high mortality is just cost of doing business. The accounting is coldly rational and utterly monstrous. Daily life on sugar plantations follows brutal rhythm. Field gangs work under the whip from sunrise to sunset, planting cane, weeding, cutting during harvest. The boiling houses where workers process cane juice into sugar are hot enough to melt iron, accidents common, burns untreated. Overseers enforce impossible quotas. Punishment for laziness or insolence includes whipping, branding, amputation, being locked in punishment cells without food. Women face all this plus systematic sexual violence, but resistance flickers everywhere, small and large. Tools break accidentally at inconvenient moments. Work slows through coordinated effort that's hard to prove but impossible to miss. Songs carry coded messages about escapes, planned resistance, news from other plantations. Pockets of maroonage develop in the mountains of the Nord and Artibonite, where people escape and build hidden communities. One French official writes in 1751, "The Negroes feign illness, break tools, work slowly despite punishment. They are ungovernable." He's accidentally describing organized resistance and calling it laziness. Plantation wealth is the sugar-coated shell hiding a brutal core built on bodies, and the people forced into this system will not accept it forever. Between 1710 and 1780, slave ships arrive monthly at Cap Français, carrying human cargo from Senegambia, Congo, Dahomey, the Bight of Benin, Yorubaland, the Gold Coast. The ships have names like La Concorde, La Fortune, L'Espérance, optimistic titles for floating prisons. They bring people who speak Wolof, Kikongo, Fon, Yoruba, Ewe, Twi, languages that colonial records reduce to cargo lists with ages, heights, and prices. But they also bring everything colonialism tries to erase: cosmologies, agricultural knowledge, ironworking techniques, medicinal practices, storytelling traditions, religious systems, political concepts, artistic expressions. These aren't cultural artifacts, they're survival tools. On plantations near present-day Sud and Grand Anse departments, you hear Kikongo phrases at night, discreet gatherings under trees honoring ancestral spirits, early forms of Vodou ceremonies blending African religious practices with surviving indigenous cosmologies and superficial Catholic elements added for camouflage. The cosmology is sophisticated, not primitive. LWA spirits govern natural and social forces. Drums facilitate communication between human and divine realms. Ritual serves both spiritual and organizational purposes. Colonial authorities panic when they notice. A 1758 ordinance bans drums, nighttime assemblies, and superstitious practices, which is colonial speak for "they're organizing and we're terrified." Surveillance increases. Plantation owners hire enslaved spies, promising privileges for information. Punishments for unauthorized gatherings intensify to flogging, branding, execution. One French official's report from 1768 warns of nocturnal assemblies in the cul-de-sac plain where enslaved people gather under pretense of dances, but are clearly doing something more organized. He's absolutely right. They're strategizing, healing, praying, maintaining identity, building networks, refusing cultural erasure, planning resistance. African ethnic associations, called nations in colonial terminology, maintain group identity despite European efforts to mix people to prevent organization. Congos, Aradas, Ibos, Mandingos, Senegambians form mutual aid societies that are far more than social clubs. They're survival networks providing loans, settling disputes, maintaining languages, organizing funerals, and later forming the organizational backbone of revolutionary military units. Culture becomes resistance. Identity becomes defiance. Memory becomes weapon. And soon, resistance becomes revolution. The year is around 1750 in the mountains above present-day Artibonite and Nord departments. Maroon communities, Nègre Marron, people who escaped slavery and refused recapture, build villages hidden by fog, steep ridges, dense forest, and intimate knowledge of terrain no European can navigate. Colonial maps mark these areas as unexplored, dangerous, or uninhabited, which really means Maroons control them and French troops are scared to enter. Leaders emerge whose names survive in fragments of colonial documents and oral tradition. Noël, Télémaque, Padre Jean, Colas, and many others whose names never entered written archives, but whose actions shaped colonial nightmares. They organized defensive systems, raid plantations for supplies, and to free more people, establish farms growing yams and plantains, trade secretly with enslaved people still on plantations who provide intelligence and supplies in exchange for goods. Then there's François Macandal, who becomes legend. Enslaved on a plantation in the Plaine du Nord, he loses his hand in a mill accident and is reassigned to herding livestock, which gives him mobility. Around 1751, he escapes into the mountains and orchestrates something unprecedented, a coordinated poisoning conspiracy across multiple plantations. Macandal, described in French sources as a mandung sorcerer and fanatical Muslim, possesses extensive knowledge of plants, poisons, and chemistry. His network of accomplices distributes poison into wells, food stores, and water sources, potentially killing hundreds over 6 years. French officials estimate thousands dead, though historians suspect colonial paranoia inflated numbers. But the conspiracy was undeniably real and terrifyingly effective. Captured in January 1758, Macandal is sentenced to burning at the stake in Cap Français public square. Multiple eyewitness accounts describe the execution. Some say he broke free from the post and tried to escape before being thrown back into flames. Others say he fell into the fire when the post collapsed. What matters is what enslaved witnesses believed: that Macandal transformed into a mosquito and flew away, that he would return to complete the revolution. For decades afterward, enslaved people whisper that Macandal will return. The legend shapes resistance consciousness more powerfully than the execution shaped colonial authority. The mountains shape resistance. The Maroons shape legend. And in August 1791, the legend becomes reality when plantations explode into revolution. Location: Bois Caïman, a clearing in the forest near Morne Rouge in today's Nord department. The date is 14th August 1791. A tropical storm rolls in, lightning illuminating the trees, rain soaking the ground. Enslaved leaders gather secretly, violating every colonial law against assembly. Dutty Boukman, a formerly enslaved Jamaican who works as a coachman and Vodou priest, leads the ceremony. Cécile Fatiman, a Vodou priestess whose mother was African and who possesses spiritual authority, participates. Others attend whose names don't survive in archives: drivers, field workers, house servants, skilled craftsmen, representing networks across multiple plantations. The ceremony's exact details remain debated between oral tradition and later accounts. What's consistent? This is a Vodou ritual where a pig is sacrificed, an oath is sworn in Creole, and the message is crystalline: freedom or death. No compromise, no negotiation, no return. Boukman allegedly speaks words preserved in oral tradition. The God who created the sun which gives us light, who rouses the waves and rules the storm, Though hidden in the clouds, he watches us. He sees all that the white man does. The God of the white man inspires him with crime, but our God calls upon us to do good works. Our God who is good to us orders us to revenge our wrongs. He will direct our arms and aid us. Throw away the symbol of the God of the whites, who has so often caused us to weep, and listen to the voice of liberty, which speaks in the hearts of us all. Within days, plantations burn across the Plaine du Nord in coordinated attacks. On the night of 20th August 1791, enslaved people on dozens of plantations simultaneously rise in revolt. They burn cane fields, destroy mills, kill overseers and planters. Fires visible from Cap Français light the sky like dawn. Tens of thousands join the revolt within weeks. This isn't spontaneous rage. It's organized military action with leaders, strategy, and objectives. French colonists flee to Cap Français, Port-au-Prince, and Les Cayes, writing panicked letters to Paris. The whole colony is lost. One planter writes, "We are sitting on a volcano ready to explode." Another, "The slaves have declared war on us." The rebellion spreads beyond the Plaine du Nord into the mountains, across provinces. Leaders emerge with military experience. Jean-François Papillon and Georges Biassou, who initially align with Spanish forces from Santo Domingo, offering freedom in exchange for military service against France. Jeannot, notorious for extreme violence against whites. And Toussaint Breda, a middle-aged coachman whose strategic brilliance will reshape everything. Spain and Britain, smelling opportunity during France's revolutionary chaos, invade to exploit the situation, because nothing says diplomacy like invading someone else's colony during their revolution. Britain occupies parts of the western coast from 1793. Spain controls border regions. By 1793, French civil commissioner Léger Félicité Sontonax, desperate for allies against foreign invasion and losing control, abolishes slavery in Saint-Domingue's northern province on 29th of August. On 4th of February 1794, the French National Convention in Paris ratifies general emancipation across all French colonies. Toussaint Louverture, calculating that revolutionary France offers better odds than monarchist Spain, switches allegiance to France and brings his disciplined troops with him. The enslaved didn't just revolt. They launched the most successful slave uprising in world history, one that forced a European power to abolish slavery and will ultimately create an independent nation. The revolution is just getting started, and the world is watching in horror and fascination. Between 1794 and 1802, Toussaint Louverture governs most of Saint-Domingue with the official title of Governor-General, though he functions as an independent ruler. He defeats British invasion forces who occupy parts of the colony from 1793 to 1798, costing Britain 45,000 casualties, mostly from yellow fever. He outmaneuvers Spanish troops. He suppresses internal rivals, including André Rigaud's mulatto forces in the brutal War of Knives. He forces former enslavers who remained to accept the new order where black men command and whites obey. His 1801 Constitution, drafted without French approval, declares him Governor-General for life with power to name his successor and Saint-Domingue autonomous within the French Empire. Article 3 boldly states, "There cannot exist slaves on this territory. Servitude is forever abolished. All men are born, live, and die free and French." The territory that will later become Haiti's 10 departments functions as military districts under strict control. Toussaint's officers, including Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe, and Alexandre Pétion, enforce agricultural policies requiring former enslaved people to remain on plantations as paid workers. They're legally free but not permitted to leave estates without passes. This system, called fermage, earns Toussaint both admiration for restoring economic production and resentment for replicating coercive labor patterns. His reasoning is pragmatic. The colony needs revenue. Europe will only respect Haiti if it produces exports, and total freedom without economic structure will lead to foreign invasion. He's not wrong, but the policy creates tensions. French archival correspondence shows Toussaint writing to Napoleon's government in 1801. "We have known how to face dangers to obtain liberty. We shall know how to brave death to maintain it." The message is diplomatic but clear: don't test us. Another letter: "I am black, but I have honor and dignity." Napoleon Bonaparte, now ruling France as first consul after his coup, despises that message. He's recently signed the Treaty of Amiens with Britain, freeing him to focus on colonial matters. He wants Saint-Domingue producing sugar for France again, and he absolutely doesn't want black self-governance setting precedents that might inspire slaves elsewhere, including in France's richest remaining colony, Martinique. In 1802, Napoleon sends his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, with 40,000 troops aboard 86 ships to restore French control and, though not stated publicly, to restore slavery. Toussaint tries to negotiate freedom with an empire ideologically allergic to the concept, and Napoleon sends overwhelming force to erase what the revolution created. Leclerc's massive fleet lands in February 1802 at Cap Français in the Nord and Port-au-Prince in West, with additional forces landing at Fort Liberté in the Nord-Est. Fighting erupts immediately across the colony. Toussaint's generals resist, but Leclerc employs deception, publicly promising to maintain freedom while carrying secret orders to restore slavery once resistance is crushed. Henri Christophe, defending Cap Français, burns the city rather than surrender it intact to French control. Dessalines scorches earth across the Artibonite. Toussaint conducts guerrilla warfare in the mountains, but French reinforcements keep arriving. By May 1802, through combination of military pressure and false promises, Leclerc swears repeatedly that France will maintain emancipation. He convinces several of Toussaint's generals to defect. Toussaint, seeing his forces weakening and believing negotiation possible, agrees to retire to his plantation near Ennery in exchange for peace. In June 1802, during a meeting at Gonaives, French officers arrest Toussaint through treachery. He's immediately deported to France aboard the frigate Héros, imprisoned in Fort de Joux in the Jura Mountains, and subjected to cold, isolation, malnutrition, and interrogation. He dies there on 7th April 1803 from pneumonia and mistreatment. His last writings include the prophetic statement, "In overthrowing me, you have cut down in Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the tree of liberty. It will spring up again from the roots, for they are many and they are deep." Meanwhile, in Saint-Domingue, the truth emerges. News arrives that France has restored slavery in Guadeloupe in July 1802, proving Leclerc's promises were lies. Leclerc begins disarming black and mulatto troops, segregating units, restricting movement, all preparation for re-enslavement. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who had temporarily allied with Leclerc, defects back to revolutionary cause in October 1802, famously declaring he will become the Hannibal of Saint-Domingue. Other officers of color, Pétion, Christophe, Clairvaux, follow. The entire colony reignites with new fury. This isn't just revolution anymore. It's a war of extermination where both sides understand no compromise exists. Guerrilla tactics intensify. Former French officers of color bring professional military knowledge to revolutionary forces. The French, despite reinforcements, face unwinnable circumstances. They burn cities, massacre civilians, use dogs imported from Cuba to hunt rebels. Revolutionaries scorch earth, poison wells, ambush convoys, refuse quarter. Yellow fever devastates French troops worse than combat. By late 1803, of the 60,000 French soldiers sent to Saint-Domingue, over 50,000 are dead from disease, combat, or suicide. Leclerc himself dies of yellow fever in November 1802. His replacement, General Rochambeau, escalates atrocities, mass drownings, gas chambers using sulfur, public torture, which only hardens resistance. The final decisive battle occurs on 18th of November 1803 at Vertières, a fortified position just south of Cap Français. Revolutionary forces led by Generals Capois-Lamour and Clairvaux storm French positions in direct assault. Capois-Lamour's fearless charge becomes legendary. When his horse is shot beneath him, he continues advancing on foot, hat held high on his sword, shouting, "En avant!" French defenders, impressed by his courage, allegedly order a brief ceasefire to salute him before fighting resumes. The French lose Vertières, they lose Cap Français, they lose Saint-Domingue. On 4th of December 1803, Rochambeau surrenders and evacuates remaining French forces. On 1st January 1804, in Gonaïves, in the Artibonite department, Jean-Jacques Dessalines proclaims independence, restoring the indigenous name Haiti. He tears the white band from the French tricolor flag, leaving blue and red stitched together, the new Haitian flag. He declares himself Governor-General, then later Emperor Jacques III. The enslaved defeated Napoleon Bonaparte, the greatest military power of the era. Freedom arrives through blood and fire, but justice, as always, takes longer. The 19th century opens in the Republic of Haiti, but the world is decidedly not thrilled. Haiti is a geopolitical nightmare for every slave-holding power. Proof that enslaved people can defeat armies, govern themselves, and survive European boycott. France refuses recognition until 1825, when King Charles II demands 150 million francs, later reduced to 90 million, as compensation for lost property, meaning enslaved people and plantations. Haiti, desperate for diplomatic recognition and access to international trade, accepts this extortion. The independence debt cripples the economy for generations, forces punishing tax rates on peasants, enriches French banks, and isn't fully paid until 1947. Haiti is literally charged for its own freedom. Internal leadership fragments almost immediately. Dessalines, ruling as Emperor Jacques III, enforces brutal plantation labor laws similar to Toussaint's, alienating both the black majority and mixed-race elites. On 17th of October 1806, he's assassinated near Port-au-Prince, likely by rivals fearing his authoritarian tendencies and violent rhetoric against mixed-race people. Henri Christophe declares himself king of northern Haiti from 1811 to 1820, ruling from Cap Haïtien and building the massive Citadelle La Ferrière fortress in the Nord Mountains as defense against potential French invasion. The citadel, still standing today, required forced labor from thousands and symbolizes both Christophe's paranoia and Haiti's determination never to be enslaved again. Alexandre Pétion rules the Southern Republic from Port-au-Prince with contrasting philosophy, distributing plantation land to soldiers and establishing smallholder agriculture that still defines rural Haiti. After Christophe's suicide in 1820, Jean-Pierre Boyer unifies North and South, briefly conquers Spanish Santo Domingo in 1822, but his 25-year rule stagnates development. The 1825 indemnity agreement, signed under Boyer, becomes his controversial legacy. The 10 departments slowly take administrative shape through the 19th century, as Haiti attempts state building while economically strangled. Rural peasants form laku communities, extended family land systems rooted in African collective survival logic, where multiple families share land, labor, and resources. These systems persist today across Grand Anse, Nipes, and Sud departments, preserving African communal patterns. European colonialism tried to erase. Foreign powers systematically isolate Haiti. The United States, still a slaveholding nation, refuses diplomatic recognition until 1862, during the Civil War, because Haiti's existence is ideologically awkward for a country claiming slavery is natural and black self-governance impossible. European nations follow suit, treating Haiti as a pariah state, refusing loans, blocking trade, spreading propaganda about chaos and barbarism. This isolation has lasting consequences. While other Caribbean colonies receive metropolitan investment in infrastructure, education, and industry, Haiti develops alone, under debt, with elites extracting wealth rather than building institutions. The pattern established in the 19th century, predatory elites, oppressed peasantry, foreign interference, shapes every subsequent crisis. Independence is not the same as liberation, and the long 19th century proves it repeatedly, bitterly, exhaustively. The 20th century opens with political instability as rival factions fight for control of Port-au-Prince. Between 1888 and 1915, Haiti experiences 22 heads of state, most overthrown violently. The U.S., concerned about debt repayments to American banks and German influence in the Caribbean during World War I, decides to intervene. U.S. Marines land in Haiti on 28 July 1915, beginning an occupation lasting until 1934. The stated justification is restoring order and protecting American financial interests. The reality is racial imperialism thinly disguised as development aid. Marines immediately seize control of customs houses, Haiti's primary revenue source. They dissolve the Haitian army, disarm the population, and occupy government buildings. The U.S. imposes a new constitution in 1918, drafted in Washington, that allows foreign land ownership, previously prohibited. American administrators run government ministries. Racial segregation is enforced in public spaces, imported from Jim Crow America. The occupation builds infrastructure, roads connecting provinces, bridges, telephone lines, using the corvée system, forced unpaid labor for public works. Haitians recognize corvée as barely disguised slavery, especially since Marines enforce it violently, forcing peasants from fields to build roads at gunpoint. Resistance emerges in the mountains, echoing Maroon traditions. The Cacos Rebellion, led by Charlemagne Peralta, a former Haitian army officer who organizes guerrilla resistance across the Artibonite and Nord regions, gains momentum through 1918 and 1919. Peralta's forces conduct hit-and-run attacks on Marine positions, ambush patrols, and recruit thousands of followers. In November 1919, U.S. Marines infiltrate Peralta's camp using Haitian guides and assassinate him while he sleeps. They photograph his body tied to a door in a Christ-like pose, distributing the image intending to discourage rebellion. The photograph backfires spectacularly. Instead of demoralizing resistance, it transforms Peralta into a national martyr, his image reproduced in Haitian art, poetry, and political consciousness for generations. The occupation reshapes Haiti's economy and politics permanently. American administrators favor the urban mulatto elite over the black majority, reinforcing class and color divisions. They centralize power in Port-au-Prince, weakening regional autonomy. When Marines finally withdraw in 1934 after sustained diplomatic pressure and changing U.S. priorities, they leave behind infrastructure, but also deep resentment, corrupted institutions, and political structures concentrating wealth and power in elite hands. Haiti resists every empire that ever touches it, even the ones claiming humanitarian intentions. From 1934 onward, Haiti navigates dictatorship, fleeting democracy, natural disasters, mass migration, and persistent cultural vitality that refuses to die. François Papa Doc Duvalier's dictatorship from 1957 to 1971, followed by his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc until 1986, uses the Tonton Macoutes militia, named after a bogeyman figure in Haitian folklore, to terrorize opposition, eliminate rivals, and centralize power. The Duvaliers steal millions while the population remains impoverished. The 1986 uprising that ousts Baby Doc brings euphoric hope and promises of democracy, though political instability, military coups, and foreign interference continue. The 10 departments become administrative backbones, carrying distinct identities rooted in revolutionary history and geographic character. Nord Department preserves revolutionary sites like the Citadelle La Ferrière and Sans Souci Palace. Artibonite, Haiti's breadbasket, grows rice in the valley where independence was declared. West Department contains sprawling Port-au-Prince, economically dominant but infrastructurally overwhelmed. Sud Department's fishing towns and agricultural communities still recover from Hurricane Matthew's 2016 devastation. Grand Anse produces cacao and coffee on small farms. Center's plateaus sustain rural communities maintaining traditional laku systems. The 2010 earthquake on 12th of January kills over 200,000 people, devastating Port-au-Prince and surrounding areas in Ouest and Sud-Est departments. International aid floods in with mixed results. Some reconstruction, much corruption, little structural change. Temporary camps become permanent slums. Political instability persists through contested elections, corruption scandals, institutional fragility, and most recently, gang violence controlling large areas of Port-au-Prince. Yet something persists through every crisis, every disaster, every betrayal by elites and abandonment by international community. A culture of resistance older than the Republic itself. Vodou drums echo across the mountains once used by Maroons, connecting present to past through rhythm and ritual. Compa music riffs on African and Caribbean rhythms in Port-au-Prince nightclubs and diaspora communities from Miami to Montreal. The Laku system still anchors rural life in Grand Anse, Center, and Sud, providing social support and land security. Haitian Creole, forged in revolution, remains the language of the people despite French's elite status. Artists like Hector Hippolyte, Philomé Aubin, and contemporary painters preserve revolutionary memory in canvas and color. Writers from Jacques Roumain to Edwidge Danticat tell stories the world tries to ignore. Every protest chant against dictatorship, occupation, or corruption carries the DNA of August 1791. Every peasant farmer cultivating inherited land practices resistance against systems demanding their displacement. Every Vodou ceremony honoring Gaide, Ogu, or Azili maintains cosmologies that survived the Middle Passage and colonialism. Haiti is not defined by suffering, disaster, or poverty, though all three are undeniably present. Haiti is defined by centuries of survival shaped by refusal to be erased, refusal to forget, refusal to submit. The story is not over. Stand again at a ridge in the Massif de la Haute in the Sud Department. morning fog curling between mahogany and pine trees, the way memory curls between centuries. The land is still beautiful, turquoise coastlines meeting green peaks, rivers cutting through limestone gorges, valleys where mango trees provide shade. Still complicated, poverty pressing against resilience, political crisis against cultural vitality, environmental challenges against adaptive ingenuity. Still watching. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat rises, steady, insistent, familiar. Not performance, not tourist attraction, not decoration, but continuation. A rhythm that crossed an ocean in chains, survived plantation surveillance and colonial bans, coordinated revolution in the dark, and broke an empire in fire. The same rhythm that echoes in voodoo temples, compa clubs, rara festivals, and protest marches. The mountains haven't forgotten Anacaona's diplomacy before Spanish invasion, Macandal's conspiracy in the 1750s, Toussaint's strategic brilliance, Dessalines' declaration in Gonaives, Peralt's resistance against occupation. They remember what textbooks minimize and what powerful nations prefer to ignore. That Haiti exists because enslaved people fought the most powerful military on earth and won. That the revolution terrified every slave-holding power. That Haiti's independence accelerated abolition movements worldwide. The ridge overlooks valleys where Taino once planted cassava and performed araito songs, where sugar plantations burned in August 1791, where Maroons built hidden villages resisting recapture, where peasants still cultivate small plots using agricultural knowledge passed down through generations, where children play speaking Creole forged in resistance. The same mountains, different meanings layered like sediment, like memory, like history that refuses simple narrative. And if you listen carefully past the wind rustling leaves and the birds calling morning, past the fading sound of trucks on distant roads carrying produce to market, you hear it clearly. The inheritance of 500 years of resistance. Still pulsing, still present, still refusing to be relegated to history books or reduced to poverty statistics. The mountains stand. The drums echo. The story continues, unfinished, complicated, and undeniably alive.